Hi again then guys, and welcome to the first official Gran Turismo Sport car review on the channel. This isn't the beta, this isn't the demo, this is the full game. And what better way of easing into the full game with one of the ultimate performance cars from not just Gran Turismo Sport but Gran Turismo 6 as well, where this car made really its first impression on the community as part of the Vision GT program. It is of course the SRT, or now under the Dodge dealership as you'd expect it to be, Tomahawk Vision GT. But specifically, this is not a traditional version of the Tomahawk like the ones which we have on GT6, which are also featured on this game. You've got the Tomahawk S, the GTSR, and of course the X. This one though is a newer incarnation of the Tomahawk, which is actually inferior, technically speaking, to all of the existing models in terms of sheer power. This car's got 693 horsepower as standard, 439 pound-feet of torque, and it weighs 950 kilos. So it is lighter than the Tomahawk S, I believe, on Gran Turismo 6, if memory serves at least, but it's still not as light as, for instance, the GTSR or the X. With that being said though, this version of the Tomahawk is in an entirely different category and class to what you'd typically expect a Tomahawk to be. It's not an experimental vehicle, a Group X car, as you'd expect some of the others to be. This one is a Group 1 vehicle, so it can actually go up against cars which you typically would not have this vehicle up against in Gran Turismo 6, such as the Mazda LM55 and a number of others. Now you could take the Tomahawk S, for instance, up against that car, but even then it's not that well suited as a rival. It feels like more of a supercar to the LM55, as an example's prototype style, whereas this Tomahawk, with most notably its visual restyle with the central fin and the much longer, even long-tail style back end, which is very reminiscent of both Group C and modern LMP machines in the Le Mans classes, which I personally love. It has a much more focused, almost more traditional racing look to it. It looks more like a race car than a supercar now, and that suits the Tomahawk. It has that level of performance anyway, so you might as well give it the visual upgrades to suit that. And a number of the other Vision GTs have also been improved in that similar way. But of course the biggest question is, how does a car like this perform, not only without all-wheel drive, as of course the X version has, but also with significantly less power and torque? Well, it performs outstandingly well, because not only can you increase the standard power up to about 776 horsepower straight off the bat, and you can also lower the weight to around 900 kilos without having to pay out any money at all, and of course you can take it even higher once you start leveling up in the game, over 800 horsepower, under 900 kilos, and even beyond. Well, even in this standard form, initially, it's an excellent choice of Group 1 car, because with a price tag of 1 million credits, it's actually really well placed, and that is one thing in particular which this Tomahawk carries over from all three of the Tomahawks on Gran Turismo 6, because a huge advantage of the Tomahawks over the Red Bulls is how much cheaper they are. You can literally buy all three Tomahawks twice over for the price of one regular Red Bull fan car. That's impressive. 6 million credits compared to 1 million credits for the Tomahawk means that the Tomahawk is going to easily win for sheer bang for buck value every single time. And although this one is not as quick, categorically not as quick as the Tomahawks are on GT6, around the track, it actually feels, I think, better than it ever has before. Because, and I mentioned this in existing videos discussing the Tomahawks, some of them feel maybe not good enough to take on certain race cars, like the Tomahawk S. As I said, it has more of a supercar style, and the main reason why it tends to put in good lap times isn't because it's that good around corners, but because of how overwhelmingly quick it is in a straight line. With the GTSR, it's much better around corners as well, but kind of outclasses anything anyway, so it's in a bit of a no man's land. And then the Tomahawk X, of course, is just like the Red Bull, absolute top tier machine. This one feels, at least to me, better than it ever has before. It has very top tier GT, if not LMP style handling. which you might think it has on GT6, but you'll see what I mean if you get the chance to drive this on GT Sport. It's much smoother It's far less twitchy. The extra aero package at the back end, in a very similar way to some of my favourite Group C racers, makes the car have much more stability. It reduces the shakiness of the steering much more at any speed, and it makes it handle in a much more believable way. It doesn't have this heightened reality kind of feel that the X version in particular had on GT6 and that the Red Bulls have. Not surprisingly, but nonetheless they did have that. So overall, I would say that this Tomahawk is a car which I certainly had some reservations about when I first saw what they were doing with this particular version on GT Sport, because at the end of the day, it's kind of like taking the Red Bull and doing a similar concept with it to try and make it take on the polyphony Formula Gran Turismo. It just feels odd to do something like that, to take this car which was completely intended to be the ultimate performance machine in its own particular way, the Tomahawk more of a supercar, whereas the Red Bull more of a traditional formula car with a hint of LMP in there as well, and then trying to make it take on something so much lower in more of a realistic way seems like a strange, almost opposing thought to what the car was intended for. But in the case of the Tomahawk, it actually suits the car surprisingly well. So if you get the chance to pick this one up, and as I said, at a million credits it's not really that unattainable either, I would definitely recommend giving it a try, because it's not Group X, it's not a ridiculous level, it's Group 1, so you can take it up against cars with similar numbers, better numbers, sometimes not as good, and it's a highly competitive machine. The handling is smooth, it's remarkably beginner friendly for a car that doesn't have all-wheel drive, and even though the power isn't as insane as you might want a Tomahawk to be, you have to accept and realise that this is not your typical Tomahawk. It's not intended for the same thing, it's a completely revised model, and although it shares some similarities with the S and the GTSR in particular, again, it's nothing like those. It's a totally new machine. And I almost wish they'd kind of given it a new name. I don't know what they could have called it, maybe the Tomahawk ACR, for instance. That could have been cool, but it really does feel that much different. It has elements of the other three, the two in particular rather than the X, but it's a very nice new addition to the range, and it makes the Tomahawk, probably more importantly than anything else, more relevant, because the Tomahawks are so fast that in that Red Bull way, they almost become hated by many so-called professional drivers in the community because they become viewed as just OP vehicles. Whereas this one, it's not dumbed down, it's just reconfigured. And even reconfigured, it's brilliant. So it's definitely a car that you should check out as far as I'm concerned, and of course stick around on the channel for more Gran Turismo sport car reviews, tunes and various other forms of content. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.